My name is Tegan, and I'm 54 years old. At my younger sister's engagement, my parents didn't seat me with family. They handed me work, plates, errands, smiles that didn't reach their eyes. I stayed quiet until one moment changed how everyone saw me. I'll tell you that soon. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about family drama, quiet strength, and emotional courage. I knew something was off the second I walked through the doors of the community hall. Not because of the decorations, they were simple and sweet, or the soft music playing from a small speaker near the wall. It was the way my mother looked at me. Her eyes passed over my face like I was a coat rack. No hug. No, you made it. Just a quick nod and a hand gesture toward the back table. Can you put your purse there? She said. We're running behind. I hadn't even taken off my shoes. I told myself not to read into it. I'd learned to do that years ago. Reading into things only made my chest tight. I set my purse down and smoothed my blouse. I'd chosen it carefully. Nothing fancy, just neat, respectful, something a sister would wear to an engagement party. I expected, at the very least, to sit down and catch my breath. Instead, my father appeared beside me, with a folded list in his hand. Tegan, he said, already looking past me. Before people arrive, we need help. Can you check the ice and move those chairs closer? He didn't ask. He never did. I nodded because that was easier than explaining why my hands were already shaking. I picked up a bag of ice from the cooler. It was heavier than I expected. Cold burned my palms as I dragged it across the floor. No one noticed. My sister, Megan, was near the front, laughing with her fiancé. Cameras flashed. She looked happy. I wanted to be happy for her. I really did. As I worked, guests began to arrive. Old family friends, cousins I hadn't seen in years. They smiled at me, polite and confused, as I moved chairs and wiped down tables. Are you helping the caterer? One woman asked kindly. Something like that. I said. My mother passed by with a tray of napkins. She didn't correct anyone. I told myself it was temporary, just until things settled, just until the party started. That lie helped me keep moving. A few minutes later, my mother returned, this time with a sharper tone. Tegan, the drinks need to be set out. Use the plastic cups, not the glass ones. And don't forget the lemon slices. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words stayed stuck. I remembered being 16, standing in our kitchen, being told to clean while Megan studied for a test. She has a future, my mother had said back then. You're just good at helping. That memory sat heavy as I filled cups with ice. My fingers went numb. I worked carefully, lining them up straight, the way I always do when I feel small. Order makes me feel steady. Guests kept arriving. The room filled with chatter and warmth. Laughter bounced off the walls. Someone turned the music up. I was still behind the drink table, refilling trays, when my aunt leaned over and whispered, Honey, you should be enjoying this. I smiled. I will. In a minute. That minute never came. My father returned again. The gift table is messy. Can you organize it? And keep an eye on the trash. We don't want overflow. I wanted to ask why no one else was being asked. Why my cousin sat with her feet crossed, sipping soda. Why my brother-in-law laughed without lifting a finger. But I didn't. I pushed down the feeling that rose in my throat and did what I always did. I complied as I arranged envelopes and boxes. I overheard my mother praising Megan to a group near the front. She's always been the responsible one, she said. Such a natural leader. I almost laughed. The sound stayed inside. By the time the engagement announcement was made, I was standing near the back, holding a trash bag. Applause filled the room. Cheers. Someone popped a small party favor. I clapped too, careful not to drop anything. My sister didn't look at me. Maybe she didn't see me. Or maybe she did, and it was easier not to. A man in a blazer walked past and nodded at me. "Thanks for keeping things moving," he said. I nodded back. I didn't correct him either. At one point, I finally tried to sit. I found an empty chair near the wall and lowered myself slowly, like someone afraid the ground might give way. My feet ached. My shoulders burned. I'd been on them all day. I had barely taken a sip of water when my mother appeared again. "Tegan, the restroom needs paper towels." And the cake table, someone smudged the cloth. Something shifted then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet click inside me. I stood up without a word. As I walked to the storage closet, I noticed something I hadn't before. Every time a problem came up, eyes turned to me, not because I volunteered, not because I offered, because somewhere along the way, I'd been placed in that role. The fixer, the helper, the invisible one. In the mirror of the hallway bathroom, I caught my reflection. My hair was coming loose. A faint red mark crossed my palm from carrying bags. I looked tired, older than I felt, and suddenly very clear. I wasn't a guest. Guests are welcomed. Guests are thanked. Guests are asked how they're doing. I was staff. That truth settled over me slowly as I refilled paper towels and wiped the cake table. It wasn't just today. Today was just the proof. The pattern had been there for decades. I just never named it. Back in the hall, music swelled again. A toast was being made. I stood near the edge, holding a tray I didn't remember picking up. As my sister laughed and hugged people, I felt something new rise. Not anger, not yet, but awareness. And awareness, I would soon learn, changes everything. I stayed where I was after that moment, near the service door, my hands still slightly damp from wiping down the counter. The music inside the hall shifted to something louder, more cheerful, like the room itself was trying to drown out anything uncomfortable. I took a slow breath and stepped back into the main space, telling myself to just get through the evening. Just a few more hours. That's all. I didn't expect kindness, but I also didn't expect how clearly my place would be drawn for me, just outside the circle. My parents were near the center of the room, laughing with my sister's future in-laws. My mother held her purse close, smiling in that tight, practiced way she used when she wanted to look proud. My father stood tall, nodding along, his voice louder than usual. I walked past them with a tray of empty glasses, close enough to hear my mother say, "Yes, she's always been the responsible one." She didn't say my name. She didn't look at me. I don't even think she realized I was there. A woman I didn't recognize stepped slightly into my path. She was dressed neatly, pearls at her neck, her smile polite but distracted. "Could you clear these?" she asked, handing me 2 napkins and a plate. She didn't ask if I worked there. She assumed. I nodded because correcting her felt heavier than just taking the plate. When I turned, I caught my sister's eye across the room. She looked at me for half a second, then looked away, already engaged in another conversation, another laugh. That small moment hurt more than the assumption from a stranger ever could. As I moved toward the kitchen area, I passed a table where my aunts were seated. One of them leaned toward another and whispered something, glancing at me. I didn't hear the words, but I recognized the look. It was the same one I'd seen at holidays, at birthdays, at family gatherings where I was present but never central. The look that said, "Oh, she's still doing that. Still helping. Still hovering. Still not quite fitting into the picture they wanted to frame." I paused near the drink station to refill the water pitcher. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. I remembered being 16, setting the table for Thanksgiving while my sister was told to go get ready because guests were coming. I remembered standing in the kitchen then too, listening to laughter spill in from the living room, wondering when I'd be invited instead of assigned. That memory slid into the present so smoothly it almost felt like no time had passed at all. "Tegan," my mother called, suddenly sharp and quick. I looked up. She was standing a few feet away, now, her smile gone. "Can you take these to table 6? They've been waiting." She handed me a stack of small plates. Not once did she lower her voice or soften her tone. Not once did she say, "Please." The people around us didn't react. To them, this was normal. To me, it felt like something settling into place, something I could no longer pretend wasn't real. I took the plates and walked away without answering. As I set them down at the table, a young couple thanked me. Their kindness caught me off guard. I smiled back, a real smile, even though it faded quickly once I turned away. It struck me then how strangers could show more care in a single word than my own family had managed in years. The evening continued like that, small moments stacking on top of each other, each one pressing a little harder. My father brushed past me, near the dessert table, not even glancing my way. "Watch where you're going," he muttered, even though he was the one who'd nearly bumped into me. I stepped aside and said nothing. I had learned long ago that defending myself only made things worse, or at least louder. Silence had become my way of surviving family gatherings. At one point, I found myself standing near the gift table, straightening bows that didn't need fixing. I didn't know why I was there. Maybe I just needed something to do, so I wouldn't feel so exposed. My cousin approached me, drink in hand. "Wow," she said lightly, "you're really busy tonight." There was a strange edge to her voice, not cruel, not kind, just observant. I nodded. "Someone has to keep things moving," I replied. She laughed, but it wasn't warm. Then she drifted back to her friends. I watched my sister open a few cards with our parents beside her. They leaned in close, pointing things out, sharing quiet comments. It should have been a happy sight. Instead, it felt like watching a scene through glass, clear but unreachable. I wondered if she noticed I wasn't standing with them. I wondered if she cared. The answer settled in my stomach before my mind could fully form the question. A server from the venue walked by and gave me a quick nod, assuming I was part of the staff. That made 3 times now. I didn't correct him either. There was something oddly freeing about being mistaken for someone else, someone with a defined role. At least staff belonged here. They had a purpose. They were expected. Near the bathrooms, I overheard my parents talking to one of the guests. "Oh, that's just Tegan," my mother said when the guest asked who I was. "She's always helping out." Just Tegan. Not her daughter. Not family. Just someone useful. I felt my face flush, heat rising behind my eyes. I turned away before anyone could see it. I stepped outside for a moment, the cool air brushing against my arms. The noise from inside muffled as the door closed behind me. I leaned against the brick wall and closed my eyes. For a few seconds, I let myself feel it fully, the disappointment, the sadness, the quiet anger that had nowhere to go. I didn't cry. I didn't want to give that night even that much of me. When I went back in, the lights seemed brighter, the laughter louder. I moved through the room again, this time slower, more aware. I noticed how people stepped aside for my parents, how they leaned in when my sister spoke. I noticed how conversations paused when I approached, then resumed once I passed. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle. That made it worse. A small incident near the buffet broke the rhythm. Someone had spilled a drink, and the floor was slick. Before anyone asked, I grabbed a napkin stack and knelt down to wipe it up. My father watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. A woman thanked me, patting my shoulder like I was a stranger doing her a favor. When I stood, my knees felt stiff, my back aching slightly. I realized then how tired I was, not just from the evening, but from years of quietly filling gaps no one acknowledged. Later, as speeches began, chairs were pulled closer together. Seats were saved for family. I stood near the back, leaning against a pillar. No one waved me over. No one noticed I didn't have a place. I listened as my parents spoke about love, about family, about support. The words felt hollow, like they belonged to a different story. Applause filled the room. I clapped too, my hands moving automatically. My sister gave a small speech of her own. She thanked everyone who had helped make the night special. She mentioned friends, co-workers, even the venue staff. She didn't mention me. I wasn't surprised. Still, it stung. I stared at the floor, tracing the pattern in the carpet, reminding myself to breathe. As the night wore on, something shifted inside me. Not a burst of anger, not a sudden decision, just a quiet awareness. I saw my family clearly without excuses. I saw how they moved through the world, how easily they overlooked what didn't shine the way they expected. And for the first time, I stopped trying to step into their light. I finished one last task, setting a chair upright that had tipped over. I straightened my shoulders and stood still for a moment. Around me, the party continued. Music played. Glasses clinked. My parents laughed. My sister smiled. And I realized that even though I was surrounded by people, I had never felt more alone or more awake. I didn't know yet what would happen next. I wasn't planning anything. I simply knew this. I was done shrinking myself to fit a role no one had ever asked if I wanted. That realization didn't come with noise or drama. It came quietly, like a door closing behind me, sealing off something old and painful. And as I stood there, watching my family move through the evening as if I were invisible, I felt something steady take root inside me, something that didn't need their permission to exist. The room had begun to buzz with more energy. Plates clinked, chairs scraped across the polished floor, and distant laughter punctuated the air, like small fireworks. I stood near the cake table, my fingers still damp from rearranging napkins, my back aching, but something within me had shifted. It wasn't anger, exactly, though it simmered quietly in the corners of my mind. It was a recognition, a subtle, almost invisible understanding that I was capable. I had spent my life believing I existed on the outskirts, but suddenly I realized there was a presence I'd been ignoring within myself. That presence whispered quietly, I can handle this. I have always handled this. I just didn't know it. I took a deep breath and surveyed the room, letting my eyes land on details most people overlooked. A crooked chair near the gift table, a stack of empty plates leaning dangerously on the edge of a server's cart, a spill of punch near the edge of the dance floor. To anyone else, these were minor inconveniences. To me, they were little signals, moments that begged for attention before chaos could quietly grow. I moved first to the stacked plates, adjusting them carefully so they wouldn't topple. Then I noticed the punch. Its crimson edges glimmered under the fluorescent lights. Guests were laughing and talking, oblivious. My hands shook slightly, not from fatigue, but from the recognition that no one else would step in unless I did. And that realization wasn't frightening. It was oddly empowering. A young boy near the center of the hall tripped over a chair leg, narrowly missing the punch. I jumped forward, steadying him with one hand while gently nudging him away from the spill with the other. His wide eyes met mine. Thank you, he whispered. No one else had seen him stumble. I smiled and nodded, feeling a warmth spread inside me that had nothing to do with the room's decorations or the celebration itself. It was a small, human connection, but it mattered. I glanced toward my sister, Megan. She was radiant in her dress, the center of everyone's attention. She laughed at something her fiancé whispered, completely unaware of the minor chaos behind her back. For a brief moment, a pang of envy flickered inside me. Then it passed. I realized the envy had never been about her happiness. It had been about my own invisibility. That's what I had been chasing for years, someone noticing me, acknowledging my presence, confirming my value. And now, for the first time, I felt it from within rather than waiting for it to come from someone else. The catering staff were bustling, their trays full, their expressions tense. One young man struggled with a particularly heavy tray of appetizers, shifting from one hand to the other, a frown creasing his forehead. I stepped forward without thinking. "Here, let me help you," I said. Together, we balanced the tray to the serving area. He glanced at me, surprised. "Thanks. I didn't expect anyone to notice," he admitted. I shrugged lightly, trying to hide the small thrill that raced through me. "I notice. I always notice." It was during moments like these that I recognized my quiet strength. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It didn't demand applause or recognition. It simply existed, steady and unwavering, rising naturally when circumstances called for it. I had lived decades unaware of it, believing my value was measured by others' approval. But here, in the hum of everyday chaos, I discovered it had been there all along. A minor crisis erupted near the dessert table. A small stack of cupcakes tipped over, threatening to ruin the decorative arrangement. A server gasped. A few guests turned, startled, and I moved. Calmly, methodically, I lifted each fallen cupcake, repositioned the display, and whispered, "It's okay, I've got this." The room continued its chatter, the music played on, and no one noticed the quiet rescue. And yet, I felt a surge of satisfaction. This small act, unnoticed by most, mattered deeply to me. As I straightened the dessert table, my mother walked past, clipboard in hand, scanning the hall. She didn't acknowledge me. She didn't offer a word. My first instinct was the familiar sting of disappointment, but this time it barely touched me. I realized I was no longer working for her approval. I was working because I could, because I wanted to, because I finally recognized my own capacity. My sister's friends began arriving in larger numbers, young women chatting loudly, their heels clacking against the floor. One of them accidentally bumped into a stack of cups, sending a few tumbling to the floor. Without thinking, I swooped forward, catching the cups before they hit the ground. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. "Wow, thanks," she said. "You're amazing." I smiled softly. "No problem." And in that smile, I felt a flicker of recognition. Not from my parents, not from my sister, not even from the guests who were oblivious, but from me. I was amazing, quietly in my own way. That was enough. A waiter carrying a tray of drinks stumbled near the back corner, nearly dropping glasses onto the floor. I darted forward instinctively, steadying the tray with a hand that felt more capable than I had ever realized. The young man looked at me, startled. "How did you know?" he started. I shook my head. "Experience," I said simply. He nodded, shaking slightly, clearly impressed. And in that nod, I felt a rush of power, subtle and undeniable. The room began to feel smaller, less overwhelming. The chatter, the music, even the laughter, all of it faded into a backdrop. I became acutely aware of what I could do. I noticed the small tensions, the loose cords behind the speaker, the stack of chairs that teetered near the wall, a stray napkin near the center of the hall. And I handled each with precision, my movements deliberate. With every small act, I became more aware that this strength, which I had dismissed for so long, was real, and it was mine. I paused for a moment, near the edge of the room, leaning slightly against the wall. My back ached, My hands were sticky from juice and frosting, and my shoes pinched slightly at the toes. But I felt no exhaustion in the emotional sense. Instead, I felt grounded, steady, purposeful. There was a strange liberation in recognizing that I could act, unrecognized and uncelebrated, and still wield influence quietly. It was the first time I had felt a genuine sense of agency at a family gathering. Then came another subtle challenge. A group of elderly relatives had gathered near the table with sandwiches. The corner of the tablecloth caught on a chair leg, threatening to tip the entire spread. Guests chatted, oblivious, and my parents were distracted elsewhere. I stepped forward, gently lifting the tablecloth, adjusting the table, and realigning the sandwiches. A cousin, who had been half watching, whispered, "Tegan, you always seem to know what to do." I smiled faintly, a warm glow spreading inside. This time, I didn't brush off the comment. I let it land. I let myself feel it. I do know what to do. I always have. A sudden, minor calamity struck near the drink station. A pitcher of iced tea wobbled dangerously as a guest reached for a cup. Without thinking, I steadied the pitcher, poured the drink carefully, and handed it to the guest. They smiled and thanked me, oblivious to the crisis they had narrowly avoided. I stood back and watched. The room continued, busy and lively, yet I felt a quiet satisfaction that no one else could see. Amid the flurry of activity, I caught a glimpse of my mother again. She was speaking with a distant relative, gesturing animatedly, clearly preoccupied. I realized with a strange clarity that I had been waiting for her attention my whole life, yet it had never truly mattered. The value I had been seeking was always outside me, and now I saw that it had been inside all along. My strength was not dependent on recognition. My confidence didn't need approval. I moved to adjust the chairs near the dance floor. A group of children had begun running in a semicircle, excited and loud. One tripped over a chair leg. I reached out, steadying them with a hand and smiling reassuringly. Their wide eyes met mine, and for a moment, I felt a profound sense of connection, one that had nothing to do with family, with favor, or with recognition. This was pure, simple humanity, and I had never realized the power it carried. As the evening wore on, I continued in quiet motion. Plates were cleared, chairs straightened, spills cleaned, and small disasters prevented. Guests laughed and talked, moving from one conversation to the next. Megan was radiant, glowing, enjoying her celebration. But somewhere in the periphery, I felt my own celebration begin. I didn't need applause, nor acknowledgement, nor gratitude. The recognition came from within, and it was stronger than any external validation I had ever known. By the time the evening reached its midpoint, I understood something fundamental. My life had been spent chasing approval, seeking recognition, and trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. But here, in the quiet, in the unnoticed labor, in the subtle acts of prevention and care, I had found my strength. It was not loud, not celebrated, and not glamorous, but it was real. It was tangible, and it was mine. The quiet strength I didn't know I had wasn't about heroics. It wasn't about dramatic declarations or confrontations. It was the ability to act calmly, clearly, and competently in the midst of chaos. It was the understanding that even when ignored, undervalued, or overlooked, I could hold space for myself and for others. It was patience, observation, empathy, and action, all quietly woven together. And as I stood there, noticing the small details, feeling the subtle nods of gratitude from those who had little power to voice it, I realized something transformative. For decades, I had underestimated my capacity to influence my environment, to act decisively, and to protect those who could not yet see the need. My strength had always existed. I had simply never noticed. For the first time that evening, I allowed myself a small, private smile. It wasn't for my parents. It wasn't for Megan. It wasn't for the guests who moved through the hall, oblivious to my quiet interventions. It was for me. Finally, I could see it. Finally, I could feel it. I could act. I could protect. I could prevent. And most importantly, I could trust that my presence mattered, even if no one else acknowledged it. I was moving a tray of water glasses toward the back of the hall when it happened. The air shifted so subtly that at first I thought I'd imagined it. A commotion near the serving area caught my attention. A server dropped a stack of plates, and in the momentary chaos, one of the trays slid dangerously toward the edge of a table. I reacted instantly, reaching out with both hands, steadying the tray before it crashed to the floor. The man overseeing the catering, a tall, composed figure in a navy blazer, had been observing from across the room. He walked toward me, and for a moment I tensed. I had no reason to expect attention. My parents rarely noticed me. Megan was too busy laughing at a joke, and the guests were already immersed in their own conversations. "You handle that very well," he said. There was something in his tone that caught me off guard. Calm, confident, almost approving. Then, without hesitation, he added, "You're the owner, right?" The word struck me like a lightning bolt. The owner? I froze mid-step, glass tray in my hands, unsure whether to laugh, correct him, or retreat. I glanced around. The staff, who had been scurrying moments before, paused, eyes flicking toward me. A hush settled over a small circle near the front. I could see the confusion ripple through the guests nearest to us. I opened my mouth, intending to clarify. "Oh, no, I'm just—" but stopped. Something inside me clicked. No, not this time. Let him believe it. Let this one simple, unassuming sentence, uttered without malice or pretense, do what decades of arguing, pleading, and hoping never had. The man smiled and stepped aside. "We've got everything covered now, thanks to you." I nodded, keeping my composure, but inside, something bloomed, a quiet satisfaction I had never felt before. For the first time in my life, someone who wasn't my family, who didn't owe me anything, had recognized my competence, my presence, and my value, not because I was expected to do it, not because it was convenient, but because I had earned it. My parents, who had been hovering near the center of the room, finally noticed. My mother's eyes flicked toward me, a fraction of uncertainty breaking through her usual polished mask. My father's jaw tightened ever so slightly. I could see the shift in them. The room's energy subtly changed. Where moments ago my efforts had been invisible, now there was a ripple, a tiny pause that carried meaning. I walked toward the dessert table, carefully arranging the fallen cupcakes that had been nudged by a careless guest, feeling the weight of the invisible attention settle around me. People were whispering, shifting, stealing glances. I realized that the perception of authority, even when accidental, commanded respect. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it worked. One of the younger servers approached me hesitantly. "Are you really the owner?" she asked, eyes wide. Her voice was quiet, but there was a hint of awe. I smiled gently. "No," I said finally, choosing my words carefully. "I just know how to handle a situation." Her relief was visible, but there was a new respect in her gaze. The shift was subtle yet profound. They hadn't known who I was or why I was here beyond errands and quiet labor. Now, they saw me differently. For the first time, I understood what it felt like to matter in a room, even if just temporarily. I glanced at my parents again. They were still trying to mask surprise and perhaps, for the first time, a hint of shame. My mother's lips pressed tightly together, her eyes flicking toward the guests who had noticed the interaction. My father's arms were crossed, a rigid posture that betrayed the tension in his chest. I realized with a quiet thrill that my silent strength had finally spoken louder than words. The rest of the evening continued, but now there was a subtle reverence in the way guests and staff interacted around me. Requests for assistance were no longer dismissive. They were approached with expectation and respect. I moved gracefully through the room, adjusting plates, straightening napkins, and ensuring the beverage station remained orderly. Each small act was punctuated by glances of acknowledgement, whispered compliments, and subtle nods. A young woman near the cake table leaned over. "You're amazing at this," she said, a note of genuine admiration in her voice. "Seriously, how do you stay so calm with everything happening?" I paused, considering the question. Calm. That was part of it, yes. But deeper than that, it was a quiet strength I hadn't realized I possessed until this evening. "Experience," I said lightly, letting my gaze sweep across the room. "And a lot of observation." She nodded, clearly impressed. "Well, you're definitely the one in charge tonight, whether anyone admits it or not." I laughed softly, letting the sound blend with the background music. The compliment felt strange, yet validating, unlike anything I had received from my family. It wasn't performative. It wasn't fleeting. It was honest acknowledgement, and it mattered. Moments later, another situation arose near the beverage station. A pitcher of lemonade wobbled dangerously as a guest reached for a cup. Reflexively, I steadied the pitcher and poured it carefully, keeping a firm grip on the handle. The guest smiled warmly. "Thanks," they said. "That could have been a mess." I simply nodded. "No problem," I said, my voice calm but carrying the quiet authority I had begun to inhabit. Inside, I felt a swell of pride. Not loud or boastful, just an internal acknowledgement that I had controlled the moment, something I had rarely allowed myself to feel. Then the real test came. A tray of appetizers was about to be delivered to the center of the room, but the server carrying it slipped on a small puddle of spilled juice. Time seemed to slow. I moved instinctively, guiding the tray safely to the table without a single plate toppling. The server looked at me, eyes wide with relief. "Wow, you really are amazing at this," he said softly. I caught his gaze and smiled faintly, feeling the weight of my own recognition settle into my chest. I was capable. I was effective. I mattered. Not because my parents said so, not because Megan laughed at my presence, but because I had earned their recognition in that instant. My mother finally approached me, clipboard in hand, her face composed, but her eyes betraying uncertainty. "Tegan, are you managing this?" she asked, almost cautiously. I allowed a small, confident smile to cross my lips. "Just making sure everything runs smoothly," I said. My tone was calm, polite, but firm. It was not defensive. It was self-assured. Her lips pressed together in a thin line. She nodded slowly, clearly taken aback. My father, who had been standing silently nearby, finally uncrossed his arms, his face an unreadable mask. There was tension in his jaw, but beneath it I sensed acknowledgement, a reluctant recognition that, for once, I had demonstrated something undeniable. The guests, sensing the subtle shift, began to look at me differently. Whispers circulated quietly. "Who is she?" "She's handling everything." "Is she the owner?" I didn't respond to their questions. I didn't need to. The truth was evident in my actions, in my calm presence, and in the way the room had subtly bent to the quiet authority I had embodied. And then it happened. The server I had assisted earlier leaned closer and whispered, "Honestly, you should be in charge." Something inside me tightened, not with anger, not with pride, but with a sense of vindication I had long denied myself. Years of being overlooked, dismissed, and undervalued had culminated in this moment. I had finally shown, without words, that I was competent, capable, and strong. The room seemed to pause, even for just a heartbeat. Conversations slowed slightly as eyes followed me across the hall. People who had ignored my presence moments ago were now subtly deferring to it. I moved with care, adjusting a misplaced centerpiece, and felt the quiet power of being noticed without seeking it. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to look at Megan. She was still laughing, still radiant, still the focus of the evening. But I no longer felt invisible. In contrast, I felt seen. I felt capable. I felt alive in a way that I hadn't in decades. The manager approached me, once more leaning slightly closer. "Seriously," he said quietly, his tone carrying sincerity rather than authority. "You could run this place better than anyone I've seen." I smiled, letting the words linger. They weren't just for him. They were for me. They validated something deeper, a truth I had ignored for too long. I had strength. I had presence. I had quiet authority that could shift the energy of a room. And in that instant, I realized that the one sentence, the simple misstep of calling me the owner, had done more than confuse me. It had changed the dynamics of the evening, altered how people perceived me, and most importantly, it had shifted how I perceived myself. From that moment on, the rest of the evening felt different. I moved through the crowd with a new rhythm, my actions deliberate, my focus sharp. Small crises were managed before they grew. Guests began to glance at me with subtle curiosity and respect. Staff who had once ignored me now looked to me with confidence. The room's energy had shifted, and it was because of one sentence, one recognition, one simple acknowledgement that had broken through decades of invisibility. By the time the music slowed and the first guests began to leave, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment. I hadn't sought recognition. I hadn't demanded it. It had come in the most unexpected form, through one sentence spoken casually. That changed everything. And as I stood near the back, watching the room continue its celebration, I understood something powerful. Sometimes the smallest acknowledgement can ignite the quiet strength we didn't know we had, and when it does, it can alter everything. The moment lingered long after the manager's words had settled over me. The owner. Just 4 words, yet they carried a weight that decades of parental neglect never had. I could feel the room's subtle attention, the small shifts of glances, the quiet acknowledgement of my presence. But instead of letting it fuel anger or even pride, I felt something else, clarity, a quiet strength that was patient, deliberate, and unmistakably mine. I glanced around once more at the hall. The music had softened slightly, and the chatter of guests was now layered over the hum of staff moving with renewed focus. Plates had been cleared, spills addressed, and the small chaos of the evening seemed to breathe a little easier under my unseen direction. I realized I had controlled this environment not with demands or force, but simply by noticing what needed attention and acting decisively. That, I thought, was true power, and I was ready to leave it there. I adjusted a folding chair near the gift table. Its leg wobbled dangerously, and I steadied it with a quick, practiced hand. The movement was mechanical at first, habitual, but then it became symbolic. I was fixing spaces, correcting small imbalances, not for anyone's approval, but for myself. It was an act of dignity. Every motion reminded me that my value was not dependent on my parents or on my sister's admiration. It was mine to claim. My mother passed by, clipboard in hand, surveying the hall with a faint frown that barely concealed curiosity. I could see it in her eyes, surprise, recognition, perhaps even a tinge of shame that she had overlooked me for so long. My father, standing stiffly near the corner, avoided my gaze, though the tension in his posture betrayed him. Neither approached, neither acknowledged, and I realized I didn't need them to. Their validation was irrelevant now. I stepped lightly toward the refreshments table, where a few young relatives were helping themselves to soda. One of the cups spilled slightly, and without thought, I steadied it, wiping the rim clean with a napkin. "Thanks," muttered a cousin, barely making eye contact. And in that fleeting, mundane acknowledgement, I felt a warmth spread through me. Simple recognition, even from someone so young, carried more meaning than years of parental indifference. A small incident drew my attention next. A young guest tripped over the edge of a rug, their shoes sliding dangerously against the polished floor. I reached them in an instant, steadying their arms and laughing softly. "Careful there," I said. "We don't need any emergency trips tonight." Their eyes met mine, wide, bright, and trusting. I released them gently, watching them regain their balance. In that single unremarkable moment, I felt a subtle power, the ability to protect, to act, to matter quietly without spectacle. The manager, moving across the room with his confident stride, passed again. He gave me a small nod, as if to say, "You've got this." That brief acknowledgement carried more weight than any word of praise I had received from my family. It reminded me of what I had always known deep down, but had been too afraid to admit. I could lead. I could handle responsibility. I could be respected. And I didn't need anyone's permission to embrace it. I took a slow breath and allowed myself to step away from the central activity for a moment. Leaning against a nearby wall, I watched, observed, absorbed. The room moved forward, guests chatting, laughter echoing, plates being cleared, but it no longer felt overwhelming. For the first time that evening, I felt fully in control of my emotions, fully present in my power, and fully detached from the weight of familial expectation. It was tempting, in that moment, to seek confrontation. My mother, glancing nervously in my direction, could have been spoken to. My father, stiff and watchful, could have been challenged. Megan, radiant in her spotlight, could have been reminded of my existence. But the quiet clarity I had found discouraged it. Anger, I realized, was a distraction from dignity. And I wanted dignity, not a fleeting victory or argument that would fade into the background of memories already tinged with neglect. A minor mishap at the drink station caught my attention next. A young cousin accidentally tipped over a cup of punch, and it spilled across the floor. Reflexively, I moved to catch the glass and mop up the liquid before it spread further. My hands, sticky with juice and napkin residue, trembled slightly, not from fatigue, but from the awareness of control. Each small act, unnoticed by most, reinforced the realization that I had earned my space, quietly and irrevocably. While I cleaned, a server approached me hesitantly. You're really good at this," she said softly. Her tone wasn't forced. It was genuine. I nodded politely, allowing a small smile to cross my lips. "Experience," I replied simply, and it was true. I had grown in patience, in awareness, in endurance. These traits were invisible to my family, but they were real. And tonight, they mattered more than anything else. The hum of conversation shifted slightly as a group of relatives began discussing the evening's minor mishaps. Someone remarked on the smoothness of the event, attributing it to the staff. Another, glancing toward me, paused mid-sentence. Their eyes lingered just a moment longer than necessary. I let it be. There was no need to clarify, to claim, or to explain. My actions spoke for themselves. And for the first time in my life, I felt no need to compete for attention or approval. A small twist arrived unexpectedly. Megan, noticing my absence from her immediate vicinity, walked over with a questioning look. "Tegan, aren't you staying for the toasts?" she asked, voice curious but laced with polite concern. I looked at her, my posture calm and unassuming, yet every motion radiated confidence. "I've done what I needed to tonight," I replied simply, my voice even and steady. "I'll watch from here." Her expression flickered. A mix of confusion, recognition, and perhaps the first hint of respect I'd ever received from her. She nodded slowly, unsure whether to press further. I didn't wait for her validation. Instead, I turned my attention back to the room, surveying it with a sense of quiet satisfaction. A small incident occurred near the gift table. A package tipped slightly, threatening to fall. I reached out instinctively, steadying it with careful hands. A young cousin noticed and whispered, "Wow, she's like magic." I laughed softly, shaking my head. "Not magic, just awareness," I said, and it was true. I had learned to notice what others didn't, to act without recognition, and to create calm from chaos. That more than anything had earned me a presence that no one could ignore. The evening progressed, and I found myself naturally moving toward the exit. It wasn't because I was done helping, it was because I understood the timing of departure. Leaving with dignity required awareness, poise, and self-respect. I could have lingered, demanding attention or seeking acknowledgement, but that would have undermined the quiet strength I had nurtured. Instead, I moved deliberately, ensuring the last trays were stable, chairs aligned, and spills mopped. The manager caught my "I won" final time. A small nod, a hint of a smile. I returned it. That single moment, simple and wordless, carried more weight than any argument, confrontation, or plea I could have made. Recognition had come not from family but from action and presence, and it was profoundly satisfying. I walked toward the door, slowly savoring the balance of the hall, the soft echoes of laughter, and the knowledge that I had acted with dignity. No one called after me. No one tried to stop me, and I didn't care. The quiet power of this moment, the unacknowledged victories, the subtle influence, the respect earned without a fight, was all I needed. Outside, the cool evening air hit me like a gentle wave. I inhaled deeply, letting the sense of summer grass and distant traffic mix with the faint aroma of cake from inside. I felt light, unburdened, and free. No anger lingered. No resentment clouded my satisfaction. I had walked through the fire of neglect, invisibility, and quiet humiliation, and emerged stronger, composed, and fully aware of my worth. As I moved to my car, I glanced back at the lit hall. Inside, laughter continued. Music swelled softly. Guests were oblivious to the personal victories that had occurred in their midst. I smiled, a private, serene smile, knowing that the power of recognition, patience, and action had created a lasting imprint, not for anyone else to see, but for me to carry forward. The drive home was quiet, but my mind was alive. I replayed the evening. Each small act, each unnoticed intervention, each moment where my presence had subtly shifted the room's energy. I realized that this night had been a turning point, not just in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself. For decades, I had lived as the overlooked, the helper, the invisible. Tonight, I had become someone who mattered, not through confrontation, not through loud displays, but through composure, competence, and quiet strength. I arrived home and sat for a moment on the porch, listening to the hum of distant streetlights and the faint rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. A thought settled gently in my mind. Dignity does not require acknowledgement. Strength does not demand recognition. And anger, while tempting, is unnecessary when you have earned respect silently and decisively. By the time I went inside, I knew this feeling would stay with me. The quiet confidence, the understanding that my presence, my actions, and my competence mattered more than anyone's fleeting approval. It was permanent. I had walked away with dignity intact, anger left behind, and a sense of self-respect that no one could ever take. I finally understood. The power of quiet, deliberate action is transformative. The recognition we sometimes long for is often found in ourselves first. And when it is, it can change not only our perspective, but the way the world subtly bends to acknowledge our presence. I smiled again. The evening was over. The party had ended, and I, for the first time in a lifetime, had fully claimed my place, not as the overlooked sister, not as a shadow behind my sister's light, but as Tegan, someone capable, valued, and unshakably dignified. Even now, long after the engagement night has passed, I can replay every moment with crystal clarity. The clatter of plates, the soft hum of conversations, the fleeting glances from guests who barely knew my name, and the one sentence that changed everything. "You're the owner, right?" That single, offhand remark shattered years of invisibility I'd carried like an invisible weight across decades. It wasn't just the acknowledgement from someone outside my family. It was the mirror it held up to myself, forcing me to finally see what I had ignored all these years. I wasn't just capable. I wasn't just competent. I was strong, composed, and quietly powerful in a way that didn't need loud declarations or anyone else's approval. Walking through that hall that night, watching the subtle shift in attention, feeling the unspoken recognition ripple across the staff, and even the curious eyes of guests, I realized something profound. True power doesn't demand confrontation or validation. It exists in the way we carry ourselves, in the calm decisiveness with which we act, and in the quiet authority we cultivate within. I had spent decades waiting for my parents to see me, hoping my efforts or my presence would earn them acknowledgement that never came. And yet, in the smallest, most unexpected moments of the evening, I discovered that the only validation I truly needed had always been inside me. As I stepped into the cool night air after the party, leaving behind the applause, laughter, and subtle chaos of the hall, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I wasn't defined by my family's favoritism or neglect. I wasn't reduced to a helper, a shadow, or someone invisible. I had acted decisively, protected those around me, and taken ownership of my space without needing to announce it. And that, more than anything else, became my victory. I had walked away not with anger or bitterness, but with dignity intact, self-respect preserved, and a quiet joy that no one could diminish. Even now, when memories of that night surface, the spilled punch, the tipped cupcakes, the small crises I had managed, I smile. I smile not because of the chaos, but because of how I moved through it. I smile because I finally understood what it meant to truly see myself, to trust my instincts, to act with quiet confidence, and to claim my worth without relying on anyone else's recognition. That evening was a turning point, a lesson etched into my mind. Strength is silent, dignity is unshakable, and respect, true respect, begins within. And so, when I think back on that night, I am not angry and I do not carry resentment. I am proud. I am steady. I am Tegan. I am someone who finally understands that life may not hand us the acknowledgement we crave, but it does give us the chance to recognize ourselves. And sometimes that recognition is enough to change everything, because in claiming your own dignity, you quietly claim the power to shape your life, your actions, and your story. And that, I have learned, is the truest form of victory.